The number of New Zealand retirees getting their super while earning more than $100,000 has topped 30,000, costing taxpayers more than $500 million each year. Figures released to Checkpoint show that number has nearly tripled over the past 10 years and doesn't even include incomes through KiwiSaver or other portfolio investments. Some economists say the numbers support their calls for income testing pension payments, but others say that risks throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and it's vital super remains universal. Nita Blake-Persen reports.
The median New Zealand wage is nearly $53,000, and the number of Kiwis who are earning double that in their retirement, $100,000 or more, is more than 31,000. That's roughly the population of Blenheim. The latest inland revenue figures from the 2017-18 financial year show that number has been rising steadily. It's nearly tripled since 2009. Susan St John is the director of the Retirement Policy and Research Centre and says it still doesn't paint the full picture of what retirees are earning.
The figures are actually an underestimate of the kind of incomes that many at the top end will be enjoying, because it doesn't count pie income, and it also, of course, doesn't count the capital gains that many in those brackets will have enjoyed. So it's an underestimate of what's going on in terms of where those super payments are going.
Superannuation payments are universal in New Zealand, and superannuitants make up the largest group of beneficiaries in the country. There's been much debate in recent years over whether to increase the current retirement age of 65 to reflect the fact people are working longer, but last month the Interim Retirement Commissioner poured cold water on the idea, saying the current cost was sustainable for the next 30 years. But Susan St John says hard decisions need to be made.
I think that increasingly the younger generation is looking sideways at the older population and seeing that they have had all kinds of advantages that are not enjoyed by younger people.
Economist Shamabeel Yaqub says the figures aren't surprising, as a lot of people are continuing to work later in life and many have accumulated large amounts of wealth. But he says if super wasn't paid to people earning more than $100K, that would save taxpayers about $608 million.
One day we're going to wake up and realise we're spending significant sums of our taxes on looking after folk. Quite often, some of those people will be pretty well off and don't need the support. And in those instances, I think that's when we're going to have that necessary conversation about who gets to have access to New Zealand super, at what level, and is universality something we can continue at the same time as wanting to do everything else, like dealing with child poverty, education, health, and so on.
He wants super to be means-tested, related to wealth and income.
The reality is that we don't want to penalise people for, say, working into old age, and neither do we want to penalise people for accumulating wealth. But we have to be consistent in our understanding that actually when we look out for the next 20, 30 years, our system of taxation and our systems of supporting old age and superannuitants is probably not sustainable.
Susan St John has different ideas. She says New Zealand super has enormous benefits, including being simple, comprehensive and helping to reduce the degree of hardship amongst older people.
However, the problem is that we are not taxing people on high incomes enough. And so one of the ways of dealing with this would be to redesign a tax for superannuitants for their other income that would effectively claw back the advantage to getting superannuation from them, but it would only really affect the top income brackets who probably wouldn't even notice.
Last year, New Zealand super cost $14.5 billion, and that's increasing by more than $1 billion each year. By 2024, it's predicted to cost the country nearly $20 billion a year. Pension researcher Michael Littlewood says while he supports having a wider discussion about super, current rates are sustainable. And while most people would agree that we shouldn't pay pensions to those who don't need them, he says things are a bit more complicated than that.
The trouble you get into, though, is where do you draw the line? At what point do you say that is the taxpayer's obligation to you finishes, or at least starts to finish, and where does it end altogether? And once you start putting a line in that particular income sand, you start having to make all sorts of judgments about what it should count and what shouldn't count.
The inland revenue figures show 2,500 people are still getting super payments while on incomes of more than $300,000. Mr Littlewood says people won't give up that universal payment lightly.
What do you think would happen if you put that line in the sand at 300k? Do you think that people would be entirely unresponsive to that? No, of course they wouldn't. They'd shift their incomes around so that their income was less than 300.
For Checkpoint, Nita Blake-Persen.